Did you know that the biggest utilitarian thinkers disagreed on how to use their own moral theory? Bentham and Mill had radically different ideas. One of them might even justify betraying your best friend. Utilitarianism is the ethical theory that says you should maximize pleasure and minimize pain. But Bentham and Mill couldn't agree on how to best apply the principle to moral life. Who was right? Let's find out. According to Bentham's Act Utilitarianism, the principle of utility ought to be applied to each individual act. All of our actions and all of our decisions have consequences, and we ought to maximize pleasure at every opportunity. Since a lot of actions have the potential to affect pleasure and pain in the world, many of our actions are morally evaluable, from helping an old lady cross the street to pulling out in front of a fellow driver on the road. So, if we had to measure every decision and action to maximize pleasure, how could we possibly do it? That's easy, says Bentham. We just whip out Bentham's Hedonic Calculus, which he designed precisely for this purpose. Now all we have to do is measure the pleasure and pain across 7 factors for each of the possible actions we could perform in the circumstances, and then calculate which of those possible actions maximize pleasure. Unconvinced? Bentham admits that this is an ideal that couldn't be performed in all situations. If we followed Bentham's system strictly, we'd be stuck calculating morality every time we made a cup of tea. Notwithstanding issues of practicality and time constraints, there was a bigger problem for Act Utilitarianism, and it's this. Imagine you entrust a close friend with a secret, a harmless secret, but a secret nonetheless. Your friend later calculates that although revealing your secret will result in pain and a breakdown in the friendship, the overall pleasure that will eventually result will, by a whisker, outweigh the pleasure resulting from keeping the secret. Act Utilitarianism wants you to maximize pleasure, so you should betray your friend, break a promise, or tell a lie, even if the pleasure that results is only a minuscule more than would result from being a good friend. The problem? Act Utilitarianism implies that we should forego friendships, trustworthiness, and honesty for mere pleasure production. Would you really throw away your best friend's trust for just a tiny increase in the overall happiness? Act Utilitarianism implies that you should. If that sounds a bit extreme, you're not alone. Stuart Mill would agree with you. While individual actions still matter for Mill, the best way to maximize happiness is to apply the principle of utility to general rules of action. This is known as rule utilitarianism. We ought to follow the best set of rules. They are the best set in the sense that this set of rules, no, not these, but maybe something like this, would maximize pleasure and minimize pain more than any other set of rules. For a start, this solves the practicality and time constraint issues. We shouldn't have to weigh up whether it's right to murder every time someone cuts us off on the road. Surely our calculations are always going to result in murder being wrong. We could therefore be assured that following the rule "do not murder" will create more pleasure than the rule "murder whenever someone cuts you off on the road." And what about your friend guarding secrets? Well, Mill might say that societies that foster good friendships and trustworthiness are societies that would better maximize pleasure for everyone compared with societies that encourage you to betray your friend for minuscule and inconsequential gains in pleasure. We could advocate a rule like keep your friend's secrets. What if your friend wants you to keep the secret that he's planted a massive bomb which is going to blow up the city? Well, we can conceive of 2 versions of rule utilitarianism. Strong rule utilitarianism says that we ought to always abide by the rule. But wouldn't it be completely non-utilitarian to do this when it's so obvious that following the rule will cause immense pain? Well, what about the opposite? Weak rule utilitarianism says that we can forego the rules when we calculate that breaking them will produce more pleasure. But haven't we just collapsed back into Act Utilitarianism? What's the point? I've just been talking for 5 minutes and we've made no progress. It's worth noting that there was a lot of debate about how to read Mill. He does allow for rule modification and exceptions, but some have argued that he's not a rule utilitarian at all. And when he is, how do we know whether we should understand these rules as rules of thumb or guidelines or what really? So, should we follow the rules no matter what, or just ditch them when it's convenient? Brad Hooker, a philosopher that's actually alive today, thinks there's a better way. Hooker says we ought to follow the rules except to prevent a great disaster. The difficulty is working out when something is pretty bad, but not quite a disaster, to, oh my god, there's going to be a disaster, break the rules. Obviously, it requires a bit of fleshing out, which is why he wrote an entire book on it, which we can't cover right now. But wait! We've been so focused on how to apply utilitarianism. What if we've been measuring pleasure wrong this whole time? Bentham and Mill clashed on this too. Stick around for the next video to find out why.